On behalf of the Blue Springs chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, I would like to thank Mayor Ross, the City of Blue Springs, and all the sponsors who helped with this event, and to thank and honor our World War II veterans and their families for their service and sacrifice on behalf of our nation. Will you please stand for the presentation of colors and remain standing as able for the invocation, Pledge of Allegiance, and National Anthem.
Reason.
Let's fish.
It was 3:32 a.m. New York time when Radio Flash announced the invasion and Eisenhower's order of the day. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. A few hours later, President Roosevelt led American people in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our public, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. Lead them straight and true, give strength to their arms and stoutness to their hearts, steadfastness in their faith. Embrace them, Father, and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom. Amen.
Join me in saying the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
You may now be seated.
Most nice colors.
It is my
Colors
esteemed,
with many colors.
and now it is my esteemed privilege to introduce Blue Springs Mayor Carson Ross.
Thank you so much. We want to welcome you here today. And first of all, I would say, rain, stay away. You can come later today. Amen. All right. We have some special introductions we'd like to make. First and foremost, the lady that has guided me for 49 years, Eloise Ross. If anybody deserves an applause, it would be her. Next, we have some council members here, and they are worker bees. They're working the sound system. We have Councilman Kent Edmondson. He's back there watching it. Councilman Jerry Kaler, right up here. And we have a supervisor council member that's supervising both of them. Is Council Member Susan Culpepper that's standing back here. We have members of the Topeka Jefferson City base that's here. Where are you? Right over here. We have submariners who provided the plaque on lost boats along the North Walkway that are here. And I noticed that we have State Representative Dan Stacy back here, so thank you for being here, Dan. I do have a proclamation. Oh, all the councilmen are here?
Ron Fowler.
Ron Fowler, where are you? Ron was sitting up there. Okay, so with you and Susan, Galen's here, Chris here. Okay, well, thank all of you. See what happens when I follow the script? And thank God I got somebody to kind of watch out and make sure that I do what I need to do. I have a proclamation I'm going to present, but before I do that, some of you might not know is why we're at this nice location today to be able to commemorate the 75th anniversary of Normandy, D-Day. Shortly after I became mayor in 2008, I was approached about bringing the wall that heals to Blue Springs. And being a Vietnam veteran, I immediately jumped on that and said, yes, let's do it if we can do it. In 2010, the Vietnam Traveling Wall came to Blue Springs, located right over here in this ball field. It was such a success. We had as many people show up as the population of Blue Springs at the time. We had over 50,000 people come to Blue Springs, which is almost historic when it comes to people visiting the wall. We had a number of people that signed up for benefits. So it was a total success. Then I was approached and said, you know what, this was such a success, we need to do something. We need to erect a monument for all our veterans. So I said, okay, let's do it. We didn't want to spend city money doing it, so we had private fundraising to do this. So what you're seeing right here was done with private dollars to be able to have this nice facility. Sometimes I just come up and reflect on what it means. And there was a certain person that was the driver behind all this, and I would be remiss not to mention and thank this person for their services, that had the vision, that have worked very closely with me in doing some of the things we're doing. We're going to do something else later on that I had a vision on doing, and this person took charge of that as well. That person is Eleanor Frazier. I would say, Eleanor, we make a pretty good team when it comes to things like this. So anyway, I have the proclamation from the city of Blue Springs, and I'm going to present to, who am I presenting that to? Paula? Am I presenting that to you? Or? Okay, Paula, I'm going to present it to you. Now, we all know what the 75th anniversary of D-Day is all about, so I'm not going to go in here and read all this, except to say that I, therefore, Carson Ross, Mayor of Blue Springs, do hereby proclaim June 6, 2019 is the 75th anniversary of D-Day. So I'm just going to present that to you on behalf of the city of Blue Springs.
Thank you very much.
You bet you. And one reason I'm not going to do that, I don't know if you were awake at 4 o'clock this morning to watch all the festivities on TV. If you were not awake, you might want to go back and take a look at it, because I was awake. You notice I didn't say I was up, but I was awake watching it. And so it was something to behold, and it's just a tribute to the people that we're going to be recognizing here is the great generation, the people that fought for the freedoms that we all enjoy. And I have to admit, on June 6, 1944, was 2.5 years before I was born. But anyway, that being said, I'm going to introduce the next person that's going to come to the podium, and it's State Representative Jeff Coleman.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, unlike the mayor, I'm going to read my proclamation because I think it, for us today, has some great wording for it. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I also want to thank you for honoring me to have the opportunity to participate in this celebration, because it is an honor and it's humbling for me. And I can't thank you gentlemen here in the front enough for the service that you provided for us. Thank you. So we at the House would like to have this resolution go to the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution in the Blue Springs chapter. And in this resolution we state, whereas the members of the Missouri House of Representatives occasionally pause in our diverse legislative duties in order to acknowledge milestone events in the history of Show Me State organizations that are dedicated to promoting patriotism, education, and the preservation of history. And whereas the Blue Springs chapter of the National Society of the Daughters of American Revolution in Blue Springs, Missouri, is commemorating the 75th anniversary of D-Day with a special celebration to be held on June 6, 2019 at the Veterans Way Memorial located in Pink Hill Park in Blue Springs. And whereas the Blue Springs chapter of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution will dedicate a bench for the World War II veterans to honor the courage and the valor they demonstrated from 1939 to 1945. And whereas World War II reenactor Rick McClellan will portray the moments of when General Dwight D. Eisenhower delivered his powerful words to the American soldiers before landing on the beaches of Normandy, while Dr. Dan C. Fullerton, Ph.D., will deliver DAR's program on why D-Day was the beginning of the end of World War II, the critical preparations leading up to D-Day, and why the surprise attack was so successful. And whereas other events will include World War II veterans being presented with D-Day commemorative medals and certificates from Mayor Ross and Dr. Fullerton, students from local schools performing patriotic music, and a speech from Missouri State Society of Daughters of the American Revolution State Regent Cindy Suick, thank you, about why commemorative events are so important. And whereas the goals and objectives of DAR are God, home, and country through historic preservation, education, and patriotism, which is why the D-Day dedication ceremony is so important to both community and America's World War II veterans. Now, therefore, be it resolved that we, the members of the Missouri House of Representatives, 100th General Assembly, join to applaud the history, goals, and accomplishments associated with the Blue Springs chapter of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution, located in the town of Blue Springs, and to convey to all of those involved in this legislative body's most heartfelt best wishes as they celebrate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And be it further resolved that the Chief Clerk of the Missouri House of Representatives be instructed to prepare a properly inscribed copy of this resolution for the Blue Springs chapter of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution in Blue Springs, Missouri.
You want to get a picture of the mayor and I need to get my
Rip at the rose between the palms.
resolution too. I need my resolution too. Thank you. I guess I got it. I'm just going to put it underneath here for right now. Thank you, Mayor Ross and Representative Coleman. We are grateful for your support as we honor those who have served our nation during World War II and especially D-Day. As Regent of the Blue Springs Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, I am very pleased to have with us several state officers of the Daughters of the American Revolution who have traveled across Missouri to be with us today. Would you like to stand as I call your name? State Regent Cindy Suick. State Vice Regent Joan McGee. State Organizing Secretary Jerry Robertson, I'm sorry. And Mary Beth Green is our state treasurer. Yes, of course. She handles all the money. And the others are not here, right? And then past Vice President General and Honorary State Regent Donna Nash, and Honorary State Regent Susan Bowman. Thank you, ladies. And now I'd like to introduce Missouri State Regent Cindy Suick, who will tell us what matters most.
It is an honor and a privilege to represent the Missouri State Society Daughters of the American Revolution at today's ceremony remembering the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Thank you to Susan Rue, Chapter Regent Paula Clyma, and the Daughters of the Blue Springs Chapter for preparing this memorable event. The mission statement of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution is to promote historic preservation, education, and patriotism. Gathering here today helps us to remember our important past, to continue to share the lessons learned from the past, and to honor our military veterans. We honor those present here today, and we honor all those who participated in the D-Day operation. Although they are not here with us today, we will and we must always remember those brave soldiers who fought and died on this day 75 years ago. My theme during my term in office focuses on what matters most. Growing up as a military brat and then a military wife made me keenly aware of the importance of family. When you move every 2 years, your family becomes an important constant in your life. In addition, the military becomes another family which supports you, your family, and your country. The military family matters. I've got my dad's dog tags, who was in World War II, but my mother's first husband, actually I have a picture of him with General Eisenhower, as he was a member of the 101st Airborne Division that participated in D-Day. So I am honored to hear your speech today. What matters most is that we remember and honor those who have served their country. For me, for you, for all of us. Freedom isn't free, and it never will be. Thank you for this opportunity to give grateful thanks to our country and those who have served her so well. God bless you all.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Madam State Regent. And now I would like to introduce our two speakers today. Rick McClellan is a military historian, collector, and reenactor who honors U.S. veterans with military displays, color guards, battle reenactment, and public education. As an historian, Rick focuses on World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. Rick collects U.S. gear and weapons for historical display, including the 1943 Ford Jeep that is here today. Dr. Dan Fullerton has a Bachelor of Science in Secondary Social Studies, a Master in American and European History, and a Doctorate in American History. Dr. Fullerton currently serves as Associate Professor of Military History, School of Advanced Military Studies, U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Rick.
General Eisenhower spoke these words as D-Day was launched. Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940 and 1941. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle and man-to-man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together in victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. Dwight D. Eisenhower. And now here is Dr. Dan Fullerton to tell us why D-Day.
Good morning. Before we get started, real quick, I just want to say one thing. When I was in the 5th grade, I had the privilege of writing an awesome essay on the American Revolution for the Daughters of the American Revolution. It was a stunning expose on the Battle of Yorktown, and the DAR rejected it. So today, with this invitation, I've been redeemed, and I stand before you finally having made where I thought I was at 50, where I thought I was at age 11. So I'm happy to be here. No, on a serious note, though, today we're here to honor the veterans who've served all of America's wars, but particularly in World War II. Those who sacrificed of themselves, time with their family, sacrificed careers, things that they wanted to be doing, but instead were serving the needs of our country and making today possible for us. And so with that in mind, I'd like to give you a brief rundown of why D-Day is important, what was going on, and the planning and the efforts behind making this such a stupendous success. So with that, just a quick rundown of things that, starting in 1931 with the Japanese going into Manchuria and then later on into China, 1937, 1939, we have the German war machine being unleashed on Poland. And so in a short amount of time, really great swaths of the globe were overrun by fascist tyrannical forces. We were brought into this conflict really before the official declaration of war, but in helping others fight against this tyranny through the things like the Lend-Lease Act, and in preparing our armed forces through a partial mobilization with the enactment of the first peacetime draft, building a two-ocean navy, those kind of things. But it wasn't, of course, until the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, December 7th, that we were drawn into the war. And really, this is our anger was directed towards the Japanese. And so it's rather stupendous here that the Americans early on, even before we got into the conflict, said no, even if the Japanese drag us in, we have to fight in Europe first. Germany first. The reason for that was because the Russians were beset by the Germans on the threshold of Moscow. The British had been bottled up on their island, and it was imperative that we keep our allies in the fight. Yes, we were worried, we were concerned, we had a hatred for the Japanese for what they had done. But we recognized that the greater threat was Germany. And so from that very early moment of saying Germany first, we began preparations for that. Okay, and between late 1941 until 1944, we are engaged in the war. Specifically in Europe, we end up putting 20 to 30 divisions along with our British allies into the Mediterranean, first of all into North Africa, and then into Italy, where we were fighting the German and Italian forces. We also undertook a strategic bombing campaign of Germany. More than about 1.5 million troops and 69,000 airplanes were involved in round-the-clock bombing of German targets to destroy German war-making capacity. Okay, those airmen flew over 1.4 million bomber sorties, and there were over 100,000 deaths among the Allied air crews. So this was a heavy campaign, and we sustained heavy losses as a result. We also, at the same time, our Navy and Merchant Marine were in the Battle of the Atlantic using more than 85,000 ships. Okay, of which more than 5,000 were sunk. And once those ships go down, very little chance of surviving that in the frigid waters of the Atlantic. So heavy, heavy losses. And yet, with all of this commitment, it still was not enough for Stalin, our Russian ally, who said, we need a second front. The Germans were bleeding them so badly, they needed more of a commitment from us. And so he is constantly, this wasn't enough for him, that we're fighting in Italy, fighting on the seas, fighting in the air. We need to have a commitment of ground forces against the Germans, the bulk of the German army. And secondly, for our own politicians and also for the British, that they saw this, that if there was going to be a post-war settlement where the democracies of the world had a say, then we had to pay that blood price. We had to have our soldiers on the ground making that happen. So, with that in mind, all right, we started preparing to get into the fight. And that began really as we started building up these units, but the final commitments were made by naming Kansas native Dwight Eisenhower to be the supreme Allied commander in Europe. And he was given a specific task. And his task, the orders read, you will enter the continent of Europe and in conjunction with the other United Nations, undertake operations aimed at the heart of Germany and the destruction of her armed forces. And the date set in those orders was tentatively for May 1944. That's when it was thought we would have all the preparations made. And so that's what we do. We start setting up plans for operations. There were names called Sledgehammer and Roundup, various contingency plans that eventually morphed into what we call Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings. By 1944, as part of this, in England, we had gathered more than 3 million troops with our British allies, also Canadians, Poles, a number of other nations. And those 3 million, it was thought would be up against about 1.5 million German soldiers in France. The bulk of the German army still committed to the Russian front. We had 5,500 tanks to roughly about 1,400 German, and we had about 6,000 planes overhead to support an operation against what we thought would be about 820 Germans. And so it seems like, oh, well, this is going to be a cakewalk. It'll be easy to defeat the Germans. But wait a minute. a lot of our forces were in what we call the services of supply, or logistic support forces, that we have to transport our men, our equipment, our machines, our weapons, our ammunition, everything, thousands of miles, and we have to get that to the fighting front. So a lot of our forces are in our logistic effort. So we only had, for this invasion, about 50 divisions. A division's about 15,000 men. So we had about 50 divisions available with the British to make this invasion, against 60 German. Now, some of the German were static divisions, but there were some first-rate divisions in there, and they are hunkered down defending what Hitler was building as the Atlantic Wall. Okay? We also have a little bit of an edge in that we get to choose where we're going to attack, so we can mass against a fraction of the Germans' forces. But the thing is, not every beach in France is going to be suitable for what we need to bring tanks ashore, supplies, you name it. Okay? And so the Germans know this as well, so they heavily fortify these spots. The two most heavily fortified were one called the Pas de Calais, which is right across the shore from England, about 26 miles. And then there's one, a set of beaches in Normandy, which were also available, and the Germans heavily fortified. All right? Now, we need to go into France. That's the plan. Somehow, some way, strategically, we've got to go to France. Why? That's where the bulk of the German forces are, okay? And it provides us access into Germany so that Eisenhower can fulfill his task. All right? Operationally, we need those good beaches for a landing. We have to be within range of our short-range fighters that the majority of our air forces were at this time. Everybody talks about the Mustang and that could go all the way into Germany. That wasn't the majority of our air force at this time, or at least our fighter force. They were short-range fighters, so we had to go within the range of those. We had to have access to inland areas where we couldn't easily be cut off. And we had to have ports for logistical support. Okay, so we can bring follow-on forces in. We still had more than 40 divisions in the States to come over. We have to be able to get them into theater. So it basically came down to those two choices, the Pas de Calais or Normandy. Normandy offered the advantages of having a wide open plain that offered it access towards Paris and towards Germany, and it had the port of Cherbourg. All right? But the thing is that the odds aren't really in our favor. So we have to even those odds. And so we undertake some operations like Operation Fortitude. We committed a false army, if you will. George Patton was put up near the Pas de Calais with a bunch of rubber trucks and rubber tanks and a bunch of radios. And their job was to make the Germans think that we're going to advance into the Pas de Calais. And being that he was our best general, why not? That's where the attack's coming. That was called Operation Fortitude. All right? And then we also had to make sure that the enemy with those 60 divisions could not reinforce the area we attacked. And so with the Air Force, we undertook something called the transportation plan. We sit there and started bombing the French rail and road networks so that those 60 divisions could not be moved around quickly. Now this has to be done with great care because we're trying to tell the Germans we're going to the Pas de Calais. So you can't just blow bridges and roads that lead to Normandy, otherwise it tips our hand. So you have to do it in such a way, in a coordinated manner, so that we make sure that they think we're going one place, but we go the other. Okay? Well, by May and June 1944, we've got our forces. They're large enough. They're trained. We got the supporting elements in place. Supporting elements that we don't typically think of. We often think of the fighting soldier that storms ashore, but a lot of things were put into place to help those fighting soldiers overcome the German defenses, like Pluto. What was called the pipeline under the ocean. Those 5,000 tanks, how do we fuel them? Well, we're going to actually have the Army and the Navy developing in tandem a pipeline that goes under the ocean to supply them with oil and fuel. We have Mulberry artificial harbors that we tow across the ocean to put in place until we can capture the larger ports. We have thousands of assault shipping, okay, with soldiers and sailors going to be packed on those. All these things are in place, these supporting elements. The French railroad network is in shambles, and the Soviets on the other side are massing so that as we attack, they can attack from the other side. We can all do this as a concerted effort. The invasion was ultimately set for June 5th, but bad weather set in. And it looked like that this was going to hold out for quite some time. That's why on the evening of June 5th, Eisenhower had to make a tough decision. Do we go now or do we not? His meteorologist said we've got a brief window of things might clear up generally, but this is going to be bad. So if you do this, we may take a risk. We get ashore, and then the weather keeps us from supporting and bringing on reinforcements. Are you willing to take that risk? And ultimately, Eisenhower, the weight of the world on his shoulders, said yes. We're going to do this. So we'll go. So we postponed it one day to allow for that window. And when I say the window, yeah, things are very overcast, much worse than they are today. The swells in the channel, very bad. Most of the soldiers who came ashore were sick to their stomachs. They stumble ashore. It's not some heroic charge. They're stumbling ashore as they come to grips. But the thing is, it's just barely enough where we can get our forces in. The night, by the way, the storm, being that we had knowledge of the storm, we had our meteorological stations further west. We could see this, the Germans couldn't. They thought the bad storm would rage and rage, so they largely stood down. They largely stood down on the pivotal night. Well, that night of June 5th into June 6th, more than 24,000 Allied paratroopers jumped into Normandy. The 82nd and the 101st Airborne were our commitment to that force, more than 13,000. And the purpose of these was to drop in, to seize key points, bridges, crossroads, and to deny these to any German reinforcements in the area. But the thing was, it was a strategic mission to hold these points to allow our guys to come ashore. There were many misdrops. Soldiers landed in swamps that the Germans had flooded the terrain. Many men died. Others came down in well-lit areas. And even though the Germans had stood down, they came into heavily fortified zones and were shot down before they could even get out of their harness. But the thing is, they landed here, there, and everywhere. But every one of the paratroopers' objectives were met that night. And further, they sowed great confusion among the German forces that were starting to come awake to what was coming down on them. The airborne drops paved the way for the morning of June 6th with a massive air and sea bombardment. Okay? This bombardment was needed not only to suppress the defenses, but also to crater the beaches, to give our guys a chance to dive into holes to avoid shell fire. Unfortunately, much of this, with the smoke obscuring the battlefield, many of the shells went over or were dropped inland, so not much help. By 7:30, the landing started at 5 different beaches. To the east, it was the British and Canadian beaches of Sword, Juno, and Gold. Their job was to seize the high ground around Bayou and Caen. The point of this high ground, if we could seize this quickly, we get ashore and we can head towards Paris. Okay, it's about not being blocked in. All right, the U.S. contingent was to the west, where the 1st and 29th Divisions assaulted Omaha Beach, and the 4th Infantry Division was to go up against Utah Beach, and their job was to swing to the west and get Cherbourg, so we could have those follow-on forces. The thing is, though, even though the German forces stood down, they were slowly coming to awake to the danger. There were considerable German forces in the area, even a couple of forces that Allied intelligence did not pick up as having moved into the area, like the 352nd Division, which was put in just days before, right behind Omaha Beach. Another one was to the west in front of the 4th Infantry Division sector, the 91st Air Landing Division, which meant that the Americans were going to be in for a tough fight. These were veteran formations from Russia. They were there to rest and recuperate and get recruits in, and we hit them head on. Okay, it meant that there was extremely bitter fighting at Omaha. We landed more than at low tide so we could get across the beach obstacles. 300 meters, if anybody's ever been there, it is a pool table. There is no cover there, and the Germans commanded the high ground above on the bluffs. What it meant was across the D-Day, there were more than 10,000 casualties, 4,400 of them being killed in action or mortally wounded. The bitter fighting there, and the fact that we were held up on the beach during most of that day, and the fact that the British were having slow going because of the 21st German Panzer Division up near Caen, none of the Allied objectives were reached that day. None. Okay, we did not get the high ground. We did not capture Cherbourg. And yet D-Day is a remarkable success. Okay, it's not a failure. Why? Because Hitler's Atlantic Wall that he'd been spending 4 years to build was breached in a single day. By the end of that day, 160,000 troops were ashore. Okay? By the end of June, almost 1 million were in France, and more were to come. Because of Fortitude, Operation Fortitude, and the transportation plan, the Allies were able to win the Battle of the Buildup. We have forces going in while the Germans continued to think that maybe this was just a diversion and that we're going to still attack in the Pas de Calais. Patton's still up there. and it's very difficult for them to move those supplies around. Now, it still didn't mean that it was an easy fight. It was a very tough country we're in Normandy, but we're on the same shore with the enemy. We're coming to grips with the German army, really for the first time on their territory, on European soil. All right, we won the Battle of the Buildup, and after 2 months of heavy fighting, very heavy fighting, enduring heavy casualties, we are finally able to break out and sweep through France. And it truly is the beginning of the end. Because now we have the Americans and the British moving in from the west, the Russians coming in from the east, more Allied forces coming in from the south. Hitler's Germany is finally doomed. And D-Day made that possible. In conclusion, I want to thank the DAR for having me and for hosting commemorations like these, because it truly is about keeping the memory of these sacrifices alive. And that's the thing here, that we're doing this all to say one big thank you to the veterans, the combat soldiers, the logisticians, the mechanics, all of these people that made these plans, these operations possible. It's their sacrifice, their efforts that made D-Day and Allied victory in World War II absolute. Thank you.
Is Nick Ramirez here? Where is he? We need you down here. Thank you, gentlemen, for taking us back to those hours before D-Day and a deeper understanding of D-Day. Someone asked me what the D stood for, and when I looked it up, I think Eisenhower said it was just stood for day. Is that correct? That was the day that everything happened. Not all of our Blue Springs veterans who served our nation returned to their families. Please refer to your program and review the names of those missing in action. Their names are inscribed on the World War I and World War II monument in the Blue Springs Cemetery. Where'd he go? Oh. Today, we will be honoring several World War II veterans.
Back you right in here. You just stay in this seat.
And I think we just got another one. Hal Jordan, Irving Tucker, Keith Zimmerman, Adolph Velasquez, and we have another one, Mayor. David Hutchison. We want to honor them for their service, valor, and sacrifice by giving them a special commendation. Nick Ramirez will be representing his brother-in-law, Adolph Velasquez, for this presentation. The presentation will be made by Mayor Ross and Dr. Fullerton. I will read each name as they present the award. Start with this one. David Hutchison is a World War II submarine veteran, and he is here today. Philip Cross. I'm sorry. Hal Jordan, U.S. Navy, Enlisted in the Navy in 1945. Attended the Naval Academy from 1948 to 1952 and graduated with John McCain, former POW and senator. He flew fighter planes off a carrier in the Korean conflict in 1952 and 1953. He flew fighter planes off a carrier during the Vietnam War. He had several tours of duty before he was shot down, and then he was rescued in the ocean. He was an instructor until he retired, and he retired as a captain in the United States Navy.
Easier.
Yes, thank you. I didn't want to stick you.
One do it the Navy way, not the
Well, see, the Army believe in inflicting pain.
yeah. Oh, is that the idea? Oh. I get the point.
Yeah, God bless you.
It's nice they still have a sense of humor. Irving Tucker, U.S. Army. Irving was drafted in 1945 into the U.S. Army. He had his basic training at Fort Robinson, Arkansas. He was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington, where he was assigned to the 9th Infantry, 2nd Division. He served as a mechanic T4 for 19 months, received his honorable discharge December 27, 1947. Keith Zimmerman, U.S. Army. Keith was drafted in 1943 into the U.S. Army, received his basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. He was sent to Europe and was assigned to the 104th Infantry Division, and his division was nicknamed Timberwolf because they originated in Oregon, is that correct? He landed on Utah Beach. He spent 1 year in Germany, returned to California in 1945, and was to be reassigned to the Pacific Theater where he would have been sent to Japan. However, the war ended and he was discharged in 1945. He has been retired from the lumber business for 19 years. Adolph Velasquez, U.S. Army, will be received by his brother-in-law, Nick Ramirez. Adolph was drafted in 1943 into the U.S. Army, was sent to Africa following his basic training, Africa, Germany, and Italy, and was a tank driver, company F-117 Cavalry. He was a Corporal E5 with 4 Bronze Stars. He was discharged in 1945 and retired from Armco Steel. Susan, did you want a picture? We'd like to have a picture with Dr. Fullerton and the mayor with all of the World War II veterans.
Face the audience. Ask them to face the audience.
Yeah, please face the audience.
Hey, Keith. Okay.
Well, you just sit there and just come on together. That's fair. You gotta turn him around. Don't trip on the wires there. You need to turn you around just a little bit more. There you are. Okay. Good. All right. Gotta turn you back around. Y'all know good enough?
In January 2009, a group of citizens met to initiate the idea of bringing the traveling wall that heals to Blue Springs. This group included Mayor Carson Ross, Roscoe Ryder, Annette Sago, and Eleanor Frazier. From September 30th to October 4th, 2010, the Wall That Heals traveling replica of the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. was exhibited here in Pink Hill Park, up in the ball field. 50,000 individuals who visited the exhibit requested that this site become their permanent home for patriotic renewal, healing for veterans and their families, and of all wars fought for the defense of our nation. The plan was put into action with the approval of the City of Blue Springs. In 2013, Veterans Way Memorial was dedicated to the sacrifice, courage, and valor of all veterans who served our nation. It's a place for personal contemplation or reflection for veterans and their families and friends. This site also provides a place for educating youth on the historical significance of the wars and the effects of the wars on our nation. In 2018, Mike Leap, a local businessman, school board member, and Vietnam veteran, died and requested in lieu of flowers that monetary gifts be given to purchase a bench in his memory. And that bench is located down here to the south. Blue Springs DAR decided to raise the money to provide a second bench and dedicate it on June 6, 2019, the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Mayor Ross, your dream for 2 benches has come true today. As a daughter of a World War II Marine, I am pleased to help provide a bench for the many veterans and their families who now will have a place to sit, to contemplate, and call home. Those who served are forever welcomed home. Mayor Carson Ross, on behalf of the Blue Springs chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, we present you this plaque. This bench is dedicated to the veterans of World War II for their courage, their valor on the 75th anniversary of D-Day by the Blue Springs chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution, June 6, 1944 to June 6, 2019.
Thank you so much, Susan. As you indicated, it has been my vision for some time that we would have benches other than having to sit there when we come out here to spend time reflecting. And so today, that dream comes true. So thanks to the Daughters of the American Revolution and also to the Mike Leap family for also supporting and wanting to make this happen. So when you come out and you get tired, you can go sit down, then come back up here and reflect some more and go sit down. Then what you can do is you can switch sides. You can sit up here, come reflect, and go sit up there. That's why I wanted 2 benches. So thank you so much.
And now, in memory of all veterans who paid the ultimate sacrifice to this country and unwaveringly answered the call of this nation, please stand for a moment of silence with bowed heads and remain standing for the closing prayer, followed by the salute to the fallen, taps, and retiring of colors. After that, we invite you to go to the shelter parking lot where all veterans who served our nation will receive a special medal and certificate, and everyone can enjoy refreshments.
Go down. Tootle. Pass the color. Retrieve remaining colors. Right face. Forward, march.
Hold half right. Huh.
Thank you all for coming today. We would like to thank our partners for the support, the dignitaries, and being in attendance today. We hope that you will stay and visit with the veterans, walk the memorial walkway, and see the displays, and enjoy some cookies and lemonade. These cookies aren't just any cookies. These are the cookies that my father created while he was serving as a World War II Marine in the South Pacific after getting busted back to a field cook with malaria for the second time. You are also welcome to join us for lunch at Sinclair's on 7 Highway. All veterans will receive a free lunch today at Sinclair's. Thank you all for coming.